Most people would consider me close to an expert on psychoactives, or would think me to be a crackhead or bad influence on their children. True, I've read a lot about different substances, but this was all knowledge. Experience is what I lacked, so I began picking up and trying mild, not too intense, and easy to get a hold of psychoactives like DXM, nitrous oxide, Vicodin, and shrooms. But I didn't have enough to get more than threshold effects. Well, being on an island in the state of Alaska, there isn't much to do, especially in the winter. So I searched eBay for a large amount of morning glory seeds. I found someone selling 500 seeds for $5. I ordered 1,000 and had them shipped to my parents' P.O. box. I then waited impatiently until they finally arrived on the day of my friend Chris's birthday. I was going to trip on them at his party around 7 p.m. 2 p.m. My parents had left, and I was way too excited to ingest the seeds, as I have a fascination for psychedelics. I proceed to grind up one bag of 500 seeds in the coffee grinder. I'm a very spontaneous person and have sudden outbursts of odd behavior. Earlier in the morning, I'd consumed about 50.7 fluid ounces of water for no particular reason. I hadn't planned on getting the seeds that day anyways. The seeds were grinded up very well, almost into a flour or dust. I had read somewhere that water can cause nausea if taken with morning glory seeds. But I filled the cup full of water and mixed up the grinded morning glories and downed the water, getting some of the seeds, but I refilled it with water and attempted to eat it with a spoon, kinda like oatmeal in a glass. I had just consumed 500 seeds and had another 500 in my dresser. I don't know why I consumed the seeds then. I didn't think through that I'd have to act sober around my parents and have them drive me 10 miles into town to get to Chris's house. I began to feel different in only 5 to 10 minutes after consuming them. I got major muscle cramps in both my legs, my back, shoulders, and the back of my head where the spinal cord enters the skull. About 20 minutes after consuming the seeds, I was talking to some friends on the phone and complained that it was really hard to move around. It felt like I had mild paralysis. I felt sick to my stomach and I ached like hell all over. About an hour after consuming the seeds, I got minor visuals of the walls having rippling water-like effects. I was also very euphoric and realized my parents were home. I was kind of scared to walk out into the living room as my coordination was severely hampered, but I did anyways after a while. I didn't notice much of the nausea anymore, nor the cramps. I walked out into the living room and sat on the couch and said hi to one of my mom's friends. I tried to act normal, but I was in a state of such joy that I couldn't help but smile ear to ear. 4 p.m. I'm so euphoric that I can't understand a word my parents were saying. It came out not all as gibberish, but I'd hear things that didn't sound in place. Like I'd hear my mom say, "Yeah, he's acting really weird, and the other day he said his lungs had been removed." I couldn't tell if they were really saying this, if they were talking about me, or if I just imagined them talking. My stepdad looked at my blank face, looking kind of distorted. "The lottery is open if it's there." I realized he was telling me to clean my room and had told me the laundry was open. I grabbed a bag of clothes that were supposed to go to Goodwill and threw them in the dumpster outside. I couldn't keep my mind straight. It was racing with thoughts. Not even for a second could I remember what I was doing or think of something to do. Most of the trip, I just laid around staring at my ceiling. 5:30 p.m. Visuals are everywhere. I can see letters of the alphabet engraved in my ceiling, musical notes and scores of music swimming through my walls as they seemed to breathe with life. The feeling was ecstasy as I laid motionless, taking in everything I was seeing. I was on the phone at the time and explaining what I was experiencing to some girl I didn't know. I told them I had dropped acid, so it would seem reasonable. I saw books sliding across the floor, then piling up into geometrical structures. Light seemed to bounce off of everything, colors actually floating around in my room, very slowly. I would see a sphere of energy float by as I watched it in wonder. I realized Slayer had been playing, and I could not recognize any of the music I know by heart. Normally music I would have relished became a bunch of noise that pulsed through my mind. Occasionally, I'd hear the words death, suffer, murder, which didn't even sound like lyrics. It was almost like the singer was trying to hypnotize me with negativity. I tried desperately to change the music, but I couldn't focus as everything was melted into near objects, and I felt as though I was paralyzed. I remembered a CD that had some good techno. I found it, but my simple CD player seemed way too complex to do anything with. It is now 6:40 p.m., and everything is going downhill. I was starting to feel really disconnected from my body. I didn't know what was wrong. Maybe I had gone crazy. Maybe I was dying. I rolled over on my side as I had been on my back for nearly 3 hours. I started getting really scared and had thoughts that evil was flowing from my CD player, as Slayer is satanic. I looked out the window. Everything seemed normal, no visuals outside. Then suddenly, I noticed the sky was blood red with sunset. I thought the world was ending. The time had come to be judged, and the wicked would suffer dearly for their sins. I looked at my alarm clock, and the letters were all backwards and rearranged. Sometimes I saw things on my alarm clock that weren't even numbers, they were symbols. I tried harder to concentrate, and the alarm clock said 6:66 p.m. I knew this wasn't possible, and I had forgotten all about the seeds. I started panicking and tried to find the cord to the clock, but it was sliding around, melting into objects. I tried to eat my alarm clock in an attempt to destroy the evil that saturated from it. I threw the alarm clock down, took off my shirt, and slid to the back of the room. My alarm clock now looked crazy, and I could see the word fuck in it. I got to my feet and looked in the mirror. I was sweating horribly and looked insane. My hair was messy everywhere from laying down, and my pupils seemed to pulsate in spontaneous rhythms to the outward iris. They were dilated to hell, and my skin was blending into everything. I assumed I was a chameleon and began stumbling around trying to find the bathroom. My parents still noticed nothing. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the outside of the bathroom door. My stepdad asked me if I wanted to go to my get-together, which was at 7 o'clock. It came out all distorted. His eyes were very wide, and he was smiling like a lunatic. He looked just as crazy as I did. I didn't know what he was talking about, and I thought it had to do with my LSA trip. 6:55 p.m. I found myself in the bathroom, seeing a mutated melting version of myself, staring back through the mirror. My skin was crawling, and I saw very odd visuals that I cannot explain, as they did not seem to be three-dimensional. Yet they rotated really fast, moving with a liquid rhythm that was too fast for me to register. I found the other bag of morning glories in my pocket, and realized what I had done. My organs all felt like they were exploding, coming together, melting, evaporating, then forming back in a repeated order, especially my bladder from all the water. I tried to make myself puke, but scared myself because in the mirror, I was swallowing my whole arm and convulsing into unnatural positions. I couldn't think anymore. I just thought death, and I turned off the light and lay on the cool linoleum of the bathroom. I saw many geometrical patterns and more scores of music being generated from underneath my eyelids. My mom knocked on the door to tell me they were going out. I said okay and told her I didn't feel well. I handed her the other bag of seeds and said I was hallucinating. I was looking all around me, seeing things that could only relate to an evil Dr. Seuss wonderland. I said help and continued mumbling a bunch of stuff as I wandered back into my room for something to wear. My stepdad came in, and the only things I could comprehend him saying were hospital, drug counseling, and stomach pumped. They told me to put a shirt on. I wrapped my sheets around my head and shoulders. They gave me a sweatshirt. Minutes seemed like eternity, and I held them as my number one priority because I knew time hadn't stopped like this. I remember being in the car, seeing the green alarm clock glowing with such intensity. I was in a trance. My mom told me later that my stepdad waved his hand in front of the clock, and I mimicked his movements with my hand. I had two things on my mind: that I had gone insane, and my life had ended me up in a padded room, and that the world was ending, as the Christian revelation foretold. My hands were in the air. I thought I was a prophet, Jesus returning to spare the righteous. I told my mom, "Calm down, child. It will all be over soon." I sat in a hospital chair as my mom explained the situation. I saw a girl and a woman across the room. My vision faded. I felt if I was in a different place. I had no body, and I could tell there was things around me, but I couldn't see them. Kinda like when you astral project and you can't open your eyes, you feel the energy of the objects around you. Next thing I knew, I was on my feet, shaking horribly. I think I jumped to my feet after appearing to pass out because people around me were startled. I moved on impulse and ran to my mom and started chugging her water bottle. I felt if they weren't my own actions and something had taken over. There was a couple times I thought I had died. They gave me shots of something, but I was too distracted by the clock. The minute hand spun backwards, stopped, pretty much just moved randomly really fast. The numbers were all mixed up and kept sliding out of the clock. I remember yelling German, thinking it would do something. A lady handed me activated charcoal. It looked like paint, and I thought her to be a chemist. I drank down 2 cups, tasted very sweet. They were taking me somewhere. Everything was bright. I thought them to be angels. I kept hearing the lady telling me to come with them to God. I ended up in a room, and I glanced at the clock. 9 p.m. All visuals have stopped, probably because of the charcoal. I fell asleep and woke up to being in lockdown for 3 days, talking to a psychiatrist. I am now grounded for a bunch of shit that's been happening in that week. That all happened a week or so ago. The doctors told me that if I didn't get medical attention, I would have had a 50-50 chance of dying. I overdosed, my first time. Peace. At this point in my life, I was heavily involved with many substances. I wanted to expand my experiences as much as possible and try to find myself. I was 18 and living with several roommates in a commune-type house. I had tried many psychoactive substances previously. While browsing trip reports, I saw that you can get high off of morning glory seeds. The reports said it was very similar to an LSD trip. I thought this would be a near experience and quickly dove headfirst into my research. After educating myself on the best way to ingest this substance, I went out and bought several packs of the heavenly blue morning glory seeds. I settled on synthesizing the LSA, the psychoactive substance. I don't remember the exact steps, but I know one involved paint thinner and another isopropyl alcohol. This took a few days because they had to dry out completely on between steps. The end result was 2 tablespoons of white and brown powder. I picked a night my roommates would be gone because I wanted this to be a solo experience. Now, while I researched the effects and side effects of the drug, I did not research dosing. primarily because it varied on the size of the seeds and several other factors. I decided to take both tablespoons to get the full psychedelic trip. It took a while for it to kick in. I remember I was playing with some kittens my roommate was fostering when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was full-blown tripping and my mouth began to water. My stomach was cramping, so I ran to the bathroom where I promptly threw up. It is hard to describe what it feels like when you throw up while hallucinating, but if you know, you know. I ran to my room and lit some candles to set the mood. I smoked several bowls of weed to calm down. I was a little freaked out at this point because psychedelics have never made me sick before. I gathered all my blankets together and wrapped them around me for comfort. While in my nest, I stared at my candles. Suddenly, I became terrified that I would accidentally catch my blankets on fire and set the whole house ablaze. I thought I was in the movie Final Destination and believed I was about to die. I had to get out of the house. I couldn't stay here. It's not safe. All I could think about is finding a safe place. I thought about my mom and made up my mind to drive to her house. In tears, I gathered my blankets up and grabbed my keys. I got in my car and started driving to see my mom. There is one problem though. My mom's house is 6 hours away. I didn't care. I had to see her. I will never know how I made the drive high out of my mind without crashing or getting pulled over. I do not remember the drive at all. I blacked out. The next thing I know, I'm on the beach in my hometown. It's 5:30 a.m. I left my house at 11 p.m. shortly after taking the morning glory seeds. I sit on the beach for several hours pondering my meaningless existence. When I finally felt sober enough to see my mom, I drove to her house. She was leaving to go to work when I pulled in the driveway. She was shocked to see me, and without thinking, I burst into tears. I told her I was dropping out of college because I couldn't handle the stress. Thinking back, this was my first cry for help, but neither my family or I knew it at the time. I never did morning glory seeds again. Personally, I wouldn't recommend them as there are better substances out there, and the dosing can be dangerous. Hey, it's the Trip Keeper here. If you're enjoying this video so far, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Comment down below your craziest morning glory experience. I remember my first time doing it. Oh my god, was that a blast. I know that I've been reading bad reports, but I had nothing but positivity from it. Now, Hawaiian Baby Wood Roast, that's another different story, but if you want to check that out, I actually have a video on that. It's one of my earlier videos, so go check that one out after this video. But that was the wildest trip of my life. But morning glory seeds, dude, I just felt so in touch with everything. I remember I was under a blanket for like at least 30 minutes just moving around. It could have been more, it could have been like an hour, I don't know. But I remember I was in my friend's basement, and this is when I first found out about crocodile. This was back when I was like 14 years old, and he was showing me pictures of what the flesh of the people who take crocodile look like, and I was just so invested in it. And if you see what these pictures look like, they're very disgusting, very gruesome, and you wouldn't think that, but like, when I was on morning glory seeds, I was just like, whoa, that's so cool, I just want to touch it. It was really weird. And then he gave me some salsa like 6 hours into the trip, and I was eating the salsa with chips, and I just started putting my hand in the salsa and eating it. Oh my god, dude, that trip was fucking wild. That was my first psychedelic trip, and it was probably my best one, honestly, when I'm looking back on it. So I wouldn't say I recommend it, but if you do a small dose, I think I did like 300 seeds, I think you might be fine. I don't want to say anything though, but you know, because I don't want anyone to try it, but it worked for me. But that doesn't mean it works for you, because there's other drugs out there that don't work for me and works for other people. Like even weed, like I get very anxious from it, but I still smoke it, but like other people get calmed down, and that just doesn't happen to me. So yeah, that's a little snippet I wanted to say before I go on to these next two stories. So yeah, I thought you guys would enjoy that. All right, let's move on to the next story. I had, for the longest time, a strong fascination with morning glory. The first time I tried it, approximately 8 grams of seeds, got some weird looks for buying bags of morning glory seeds at 11 at night. I experienced nothing but an increase in the glow of light and slight sound hallucination. I consulted other experience reports and saw that the difference seemed to be grinding the seeds to a powder. Nothing could have prepared me for that night. A friend and I each ingested 9 grams of the seeds, ground in a coffee grinder, in water. We then took some Dramamine. 2 hours passed with nothing but slight nausea and a feeling of disconnected apathy, at least on my part. I went home and around 2:30 started to feel a strong body high, like cannabis combined with codeine. I knew something was coming, so I put on my iPod and relaxed into my floor. I closed my eyes and started to see strong, spiraling pyramidal images from behind my closed eyes. I seemed to float among them with the music, and the longer this continued, the more I felt a connection to the mood of the music. Then the visuals became landscapes I dreamt of, and then the trip started to get chaotic. I became overwhelmingly dehydrated, having to urinate constantly, and every time I felt the urge to use the bathroom, the trip got more negative. Doubt, uncertainty about reality, all began to sink in. At one point, I tried to control what was going on, but heard only a voice within me, or around me, or coming from the wall, or the demon in my head, all of which were floating through myriad of realities.
What did you think you were messing with?
Sure enough, I didn't know. Whenever I opened my eyes, a mesh of mine eyeballs and colored diamonds washed over my vision, and my body began to convulse uncontrollably. The one time I faced myself in the mirror, my pupils were dilated to the maximum, and I frightened myself. My complexion had turned vaguely purple. The passing of 3 minutes felt like hours on end. It was horrifying, for I didn't even know if I'd returned to reality and what I would believe or remember when I did. I was afraid that I found that the universe was really chaos and that I'd wake up from this and forget that I'd seen what I did and never know. But around 5, a couple days later, in LSA time, it started to subside. I could remain in reality for longer periods of time. I began to drink more water and slowly returned to life. Surprisingly, I remembered all of the experience that morning, utterly humbled. I had deeply underestimated the power of LSA. The next day was rough. I felt, like never before, relief at being alive. Every breath of air felt good because it went into my lungs, and not a cocoon of eyeballs and multicolored diamonds. At one point, my friend splashed me with cold water during the afternoon, a full 12 hours after I'd recovered, and I was still shocked. Sensations were too overwhelming. The pleasantness of bending reality for 30 minutes was blown out of the water by the 3 hours I spent when reality was destroyed. A nightmare. I remember the taste of nothing. The seeds I had chosen from the hardware store had no labels letting on that they had been treated, so I took them as such. I noticed no chemical flavor. They tasted like nothing at all. In fact, I added ground salt for just a pinch of spice. After an hour and a half or so, the trip started coming on very hard. I was vacillating between the den inside and the backyard, partly because I was unsure what was happening to me. I had only one mushroom trip to my experience. I would find that I was completely unprepared for what would happen next. At the onset of the trip, at first, colors took on an aural sheen to their periphery. I remember staring at a brass sun wall decoration and seeing the diminishing daylight ricochet, refract, and split into rainbows in the area directly in front of me. Following this, oral hallucinations began to creep from behind me, filling my mind with cackles and laughs. As the sun set outside, I began to see imaginary lines of my reality shoot out in front of me and vanish into perspective. From their extensions beyond me, the lines I saw began to bend until they broke. At the epicenter of their union, what I thought looked like a portal opened up. From the tear in my imaginary sky, demons, the ultimate source of the laughter, fell into my plane. Needless to say, this freaked me out beyond words, and I decided it would be for the best if I went back inside. My thought processes slowed down. I could not operate a remote control to turn on my television. My brain felt stupid. My inner voice was gone, replaced with an overwhelming static, and my thoughts came slowly. When my dad asked me how I was feeling, I could not answer him. I had no words. I was beginning to lose my mind. I remember watching the television and changing the channels nonstop. In my brain, I could not focus on a single point of thought. There was a violent ebbing of feeling in my mind. I began to fixate on the words from that seminal masterpiece of writing, A Scanner Darkly. There are no weekend warriors on the D. You're either on it or you haven't tried it. Paranoia took hold. I knew this was going to end badly. I curled into a ball on the floor. In my mind, I was convinced that instead of taking a simple seed, I had taken substance D from the movie. I remember going through my house, but I did not feel like I was moving. I cannot remember any physical sensation. I informed my dad, watching TV in another part of the house, that I had taken substance D and, having done that, began to cry. My mother took me to the emergency room not long after she found out. I remember lying in the back of the car with my eyes closed. I remember the voices of my mother and my aunt, but I cannot recall their conversation. In my mind, other happenings took precedence. I imagined that the sum of my high school anti-drug education was subliminal messaging that these seeds, my substance D, were going to fry my brain. I saw myself, impossibly, but remember that I'm out of my mind right now, retching on the seats. I saw myself as a vegetable at the conclusion of my trip due to my fixation on the movie. I expected to be in a waking coma, extensively brain damaged, and permanently retarded. My brain felt like it was on fire. I was almost to the hospital when the demon appeared. He told me that the car ride I was on was actually my death, and I was now on my way to hell. Perhaps now my sheer panic is evident as the car door opened and I was escorted into the emergency intake ward at the hospital. Much like in A Scanner Darkly, people's faces, especially the doctors, were oblique and cartoon-like. I remember trying to explain why I took the seeds, but to no avail. I wanted to say that I felt inspired by my favorite authors, Allen Ginsberg, Philip K. Dick, Burroughs, and Hunter S. Thompson, all had their flings back in the day, experimenting and trying to revel in new consciousness, but no words came. I felt ashamed. I felt busted. The trip was beginning to subside in intensity, but I would feel its effects on my brain, especially the paranoia and feeling of injury, throughout the night. Sleep did not come. My brain was still revving high and hotly. The entire night, I feared I had caused permanent damage to myself. My consciousness waned, and for a few minutes, I was asleep. The next day dragged on harshly. My mother dictated directions to me, but my brain was still recoiling in horror from the previous night of hell. I had no short-term memory. I had no memory at all. Words would not come, and my conversations were short and terminal. I was convinced at this point that I was brain damaged. As the day progressed and I attempted to rest more, I started to feel better. By the end of the evening, I was able to eat solid food again, but just barely. It has been over a month since my tragic miscalculation of dosage. I am back up at my university, and I'm still attending my classes. To my overwhelming joy, I have suffered no lasting ill effects. I realize now how much substance I actually took in, and I feel like I lucked out. I cannot imagine how my trip could have been worse. Besides the terror, my family found out about this particular drug habit, but I am glad that my suffering was negligible. I have sworn off all psychoactive drugs and everything except marijuana for my future. I even plan to kick the green eventually. Never, ever do what I did. A crash dose of LSA will likely give voices to inner demons you were previously aware of. I included many of my hallucinations, but it's not nearly all of them. The paranoia alone is unsettling and bending. Know from this story that horrible things happen when one loses all touch with reality. I have a new respect for those seeds and how they made me insane for a day.